Every high school has that one student who seems to disappear into the background, and at Lincoln High, that student was Emma Martinez. She sat in the back corner of every classroom, always wearing the same faded denim jacket that had seen better days, her dark hair falling like a curtain across her face whenever a teacher called on her. Most students barely noticed her existence, but Marcus Thompson did. Marcus wasn't your typical popular kid, though he easily could have been. Star of the basketball team, honor roll student, and blessed with the kind of easy smile that made teachers and classmates alike gravitate toward him. But what set Marcus apart wasn't his achievements, it was his ability to see people others overlooked. While his teammates were focused on weekend parties and college scouts, Marcus found himself watching Emma during lunch periods, noting things others missed. She never went to the cafeteria. Never. While everyone else rushed to grab their favorite spots and compare lunch trades, Emma would slip away to the library or find an empty classroom, always carrying nothing more than a worn paperback book and a water bottle that looked like it had been refilled countless times. At first, Marcus assumed she was just antisocial, maybe one of those kids who preferred solitude. But as weeks turned into months, he began to notice other details that painted a different picture. Emma's clothes, while always clean, were clearly hand-me-downs or thrift store finds. Her shoes had been resoled multiple times, the kind of careful repair work that spoke of necessity rather than choice. She never participated in class discussions about weekend plans, never mentioned family vacations or holiday celebrations. When other students complained about their parents' restrictions or family drama, Emma would simply listen with a distant expression, as if she were hearing about life on another planet. The first time Marcus really noticed her was during Mr. Peterson's American history class. They were discussing the Great Depression, and Peterson, in his typically dramatic fashion, was describing the breadlines and soup kitchens. Most students were doodling or texting under their desks, but Emma was transfixed, taking notes with an intensity that seemed almost personal. When Peterson asked if anyone could imagine what it would be like to wonder where your next meal was coming from, the classroom fell into that typical teenage silence of discomfort. Everyone except Emma, who had quietly whispered, "It makes you grateful for everything." Peterson hadn't heard her, but Marcus had. Something in her voice, a depth of understanding that 17-year-olds shouldn't possess, made him look at her more carefully. That's when he started noticing the small things. How she would carefully save half of whatever she brought for lunch, wrapping it meticulously in napkins as if it were precious. How she would linger near the cafeteria's free sample stands during career day events, not out of curiosity about colleges, but to grab the small crackers and cheese cubes they offered. How she would volunteer for any after-school activity that mentioned providing snacks, then carefully pocket whatever remained. Marcus came from comfort. Not wealth exactly, but the kind of steady middle-class security where the refrigerator was always full, where his biggest food-related worry was choosing between the leftover pizza or the sandwich his mom had packed. His lunch bag was a daily abundance. Sandwiches thick with meat and cheese, fresh fruit, chips, cookies, and usually something extra his mother had thrown in, just in case. He'd grown up taking this bounty for granted, the way most kids do with the fundamental securities of their lives. But watching Emma made him uncomfortably aware of his privilege. The way she would close her eyes and savor whatever small snack she had, as if memorizing the taste. The way she would sometimes press her hand to her stomach during long afternoon classes, a gesture so subtle that most people would assume she was just stretching. The way she would accept offers of gum or mints from classmates not because she wanted the flavor, but because it was something to put in her mouth, a temporary distraction from hunger. The revelation hit Marcus gradually, then all at once. Emma wasn't antisocial or mysterious or choosing to be different. Emma was hungry. Possibly every day. And she was hiding it with a skill that spoke of long practice, the kind of dignity that poverty sometimes forces people to develop. The realization made his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Part sympathy, part guilt, part admiration for her quiet strength. He started paying attention to other students too, wondering how many more Emmas were sitting in his classes, masters of invisibility born from necessity. But Emma remained his focus, perhaps because she had been the first to show him that his assumptions about his classmates' lives might be completely wrong. Perhaps because there was something in her quiet dignity that reminded him of his grandmother, who had raised 5 children during the lean years and never once complained, never once asked for help she didn't absolutely need. Marcus began to understand that Emma's silence wasn't shyness, it was strategy. Draw no attention, 'cause no problems, ask for nothing, and maybe you can make it through another day without anyone discovering your secret. It was a heartbreaking kind of wisdom, and it made Marcus realize that his biggest daily concerns, basketball practice, college applications, whether Jessica Miller would go to prom with him, existed in a completely different universe from Emma's reality. The more he observed, the more he respected her. She maintained perfect attendance despite whatever challenges she faced at home. Her grades, while not exceptional, were solid, suggesting she was working with whatever resources she had. She was kind to the few classmates who bothered to interact with her, never letting her own struggles make her bitter or resentful. And she carried herself with a quiet pride that suggested that however difficult her circumstances might be, she hadn't let them break her spirit. Marcus found himself thinking about Emma more and more, wondering about her life outside school, wondering if anyone else had noticed what he was seeing. But mostly, he found himself wondering what he could do about it. The question would soon answer itself, in a way that would change both their lives forever. It was a Tuesday in late October when everything changed. Marcus had arrived at school that morning with his usual abundant lunch, packed with his mother's characteristic care and generosity. Turkey and avocado sandwich on fresh sourdough, apple slices with a small container of peanut butter for dipping, a bag of his favorite kettle-cooked chips, homemade chocolate chip cookies that were still warm when he'd left the house, and a thermos of his mom's famous chicken soup, a family recipe that had been passed down through 3 generations. The autumn air had carried a sharp chill that morning, the kind that promised winter wasn't far away, and his mother had responded by packing even more food than usual. "Growing boy," she'd said, kissing his forehead as he grabbed his lunch bag from the counter. "Make sure you eat everything." It was their daily ritual, her gentle concern about his nutrition, his good-natured protests that she packed too much, her insistence that he needed fuel for basketball practice. Marcus had grown up with this abundance, this daily demonstration of love expressed through carefully prepared meals. His family dinner table was always full, conversations flowing as easily as the food. His parents would ask about his day, share stories from their work, discuss weekend plans and family news. Food was never scarce, never a source of anxiety, never something to be hoarded or worried about. It was simply there, reliable as sunrise, warm as the love that prepared it. But that Tuesday, as he walked through the hallways toward his locker, Marcus noticed Emma ahead of him at her own locker. She was moving more slowly than usual, and when she turned, he caught a glimpse of her face. She looked pale, almost gray, with dark circles under her eyes that seemed more pronounced than usual. As she reached up to get something from the top shelf of her locker, he saw her hand shake slightly, and she had to steady herself against the metal door. The warning bell rang, signaling 5 minutes until first period, and Emma closed her locker with careful precision. But as she turned to head to class, her steps were unsteady, and Marcus watched with growing concern as she paused, pressing her hand against the wall for support. For just a moment, her careful composure slipped, and he saw something in her expression that made his stomach clench with worry. The look of someone pushing their body beyond its limits. During first period biology, Marcus found himself unable to concentrate on Mrs. Hanson's lecture about cellular respiration. Emma sat 2 rows ahead of him, and he could see that she was struggling to stay focused. Her usual perfect posture had given way to a slight slump, and she kept blinking hard, as if trying to clear her vision. When Mrs. Hanson called on her to answer a question about mitochondria, Emma's response was slower than usual, her voice lacking its typical quiet confidence. By second period English, Marcus's concern had transformed into certainty. Something was wrong, more wrong than usual. Emma had always been thin, but today she looked almost fragile, as if a strong wind might blow her away. During the discussion of To Kill a Mockingbird, when Mr. Rodriguez asked the class to consider what courage looked like in everyday life, Marcus found himself looking at Emma and thinking that maybe courage was sitting in class when you were too weak from hunger to concentrate, maintaining your dignity when your body was betraying you, showing up day after day even when every basic need was going unmet. The morning dragged on with excruciating slowness. During the break between third and fourth periods, Marcus watched Emma navigate the crowded hallways with careful, measured steps, clearly conserving her energy. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact, probably hoping no one would notice her condition. But Marcus was noticing everything now. The way she gripped her books a little too tightly, as if they were anchoring her to reality. The way she chose her path through the hallways to ensure she always had a wall or locker bank within reach. The way she seemed to be holding her breath, just trying to make it through each moment. Lunchtime arrived like a moment of reckoning. Marcus sat at his usual table with his basketball teammates, his untouched lunch bag in front of him, his eyes scanning the cafeteria for Emma. She wasn't there, of course. She never was. But today, her absence felt different, more urgent. He knew she was somewhere in the building, probably in the library again, possibly using every ounce of her remaining strength to maintain the illusion that everything was normal. His teammates were engaged in their typical lunchtime banter, discussing the upcoming game against Central High, debating strategy, and complaining about Coach Williams's new conditioning requirements. The conversation flowed around Marcus without penetrating his awareness. All he could think about was Emma, alone somewhere, getting weaker by the hour, too proud or too scared to ask for help. "Yo, Marcus, you gonna eat that or just stare at it all day?" Jake Morrison, the team center, was eyeing Marcus's untouched sandwich with the perpetual hunger of a 17-year-old athlete. Marcus looked down at his lunch spread across the table. The turkey sandwich his mother had made with such care, the cookies that had been baked with love, the soup that carried 3 generations of family tradition. Enough food for 2 people, maybe 3 if you were being careful. Enough food to make a real difference to someone who needed it. The decision crystallized in that moment with startling clarity. Marcus began packing everything back into his lunch bag, his movements quick and decisive. "Where you going, man?" Carlos asked, looking puzzled. "Coach said we need to fuel up for practice." "I'll grab something from the vending machine later," Marcus replied, already standing. "There's something I need to do." He left his confused teammates behind and headed for the library, his heart pounding with a mixture of nervousness and determination. He'd never done anything like this before, never inserted himself into someone else's private struggle. But he also knew he couldn't sit there eating his abundant lunch while Emma grew weaker just a few hundred feet away. The library was quiet except for the soft clicking of keyboards and the occasional whisper between study partners. Marcus found Emma exactly where he'd expected to find her, in the far corner by the biography section, sitting at a small table with an open textbook in front of her. She was resting her forehead in her palm, her eyes closed, looking like she was fighting just to stay conscious. Marcus approached slowly, his lunch bag feeling heavier with each step. This was it, the moment that would either help her or humiliate her, depending on how he handled it. He thought about his grandmother's advice, something she'd told him years ago about kindness. The best help is the kind that doesn't feel like charity. He needed to find a way to offer his lunch without making Emma feel like an object of pity. "Hey, Emma," he said softly, settling into the chair across from her. She looked up, startled, her eyes taking a moment to focus on his face. "Oh, hi Marcus." Her voice was barely above a whisper, and he could see the effort it took for her to straighten up and compose herself. "Mind if I sit here? It's kind of crazy in the cafeteria today." She nodded, though he could see confusion in her expression. Marcus Thompson, asking to sit with her? In all their years of shared classes, they'd barely exchanged a dozen words. Marcus set his lunch bag on the table between them and began unpacking its contents with deliberate casualness. "My mom went totally overboard again today," he said, arranging the food as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I swear she thinks I'm feeding the entire basketball team. I can never finish all this stuff." He could see Emma's eyes tracking the food as he unpacked it, could see her swallow hard as the aroma of his mother's homemade soup filled the small space between them. Her hunger was written in every line of her face, but so was her pride, and he knew he was walking a tightrope between helping and hurting. "You know what," Marcus said, as if the idea had just occurred to him, "I hate eating alone. Would you mind keeping me company? Maybe help me out with some of this food? I really can't eat all of it, and I hate waste." It was a perfect lie, delivered with exactly the right mixture of casualness and sincerity. He was offering her a way to accept help without having to acknowledge she needed it, giving her dignity while meeting her most basic need. Emma hesitated, her pride warring with her body's desperate requirements. Marcus could see the internal struggle playing out across her features, the desire to maintain her carefully constructed independence fighting against the simple biological fact that she was starving. "I don't want to take your lunch," she said finally, her voice carrying a strength that impressed him even as he could see how much the words cost her. "You'd actually be doing me a favor," Marcus replied, opening the container of soup and letting its rich aroma fill the air between them. "My mom will be mad if I don't eat it, but I'm honestly not that hungry today. Please." The word, please, was what did it. By asking her for help instead of offering it, Marcus had found the key to her acceptance. Emma nodded slowly, and Marcus felt a rush of relief so profound it surprised him. What happened next would be seared into his memory forever. Not just the sharing of a meal, but the beginning of something neither of them expected. As Emma took her first careful sip of soup, her eyes closing briefly in what looked like relief so intense it was almost spiritual, Marcus realized he wasn't just feeding someone who was hungry. He was discovering someone extraordinary, someone whose strength and grace in the face of unimaginable difficulty would teach him more about real courage than any basketball game or classroom lecture ever could. As Emma took that first spoonful of his mother's chicken soup, Marcus watched something shift in her entire being. Her shoulders, which had been held rigid with the effort of maintaining composure, began to relax slightly. The color started returning to her cheeks, and for the first time that day, her hands stopped trembling. She ate slowly, deliberately, savoring each bite in a way that made Marcus realize this might be the first real food she'd had in days. "This is incredible," she whispered between spoonfuls, her voice carrying genuine wonder. "Your mom made this." "Family recipe," Marcus replied, pushing the sandwich toward her. "3 generations of Thompson women perfecting it. My grandmother always said the secret was cooking it with love, but I think the real secret is the herbs she grows in her garden." Emma accepted half the sandwich with the same careful gratitude she'd shown the soup, and Marcus found himself talking to fill the comfortable silence that had settled between them. He told her about his grandmother's garden, about Sunday dinners where the whole family gathered, about his mother's insistence on cooking from scratch even when life got hectic. As he spoke, he realized he was sharing pieces of his world that he'd never described to anyone else, because no one had ever listened with Emma's kind of attention. She absorbed every word as if she were memorizing the details of a life she could only dream about. When he mentioned his family's tradition of making cookies together during the holidays, she smiled for the first time since he'd sat down. A real smile that transformed her entire face and made him understand why he'd been drawn to her in the first place. Beneath the careful composure and the weight of whatever struggle she carried, Emma Martinez was luminous. "Tell me about your family," Marcus said gently, and immediately saw her walls go back up. "There's not much to tell," she replied, her voice becoming guarded again. But then, perhaps softened by the food and his genuine interest, she added, "It's just me and my mom and my little sister Sofia. She's 8. Over the next several days, Marcus made it his mission to share lunch with Emma. He was careful to always frame it as a favor she was doing for him, helping him avoid food waste, keeping him company during what he claimed was his least favorite period of the day. Gradually, as Emma's immediate hunger was addressed and she began to trust that his offer was genuine and ongoing, she started to share fragments of her story. The picture that emerged was heartbreaking in its quiet desperation. Emma's father had left when Sofia was 3, disappearing one day without explanation or forwarding address, leaving behind nothing but unpaid bills and a family completely unprepared for survival on their own. Her mother, Maria, had been out of the workforce for years, raising 2 daughters and managing a household. When she suddenly found herself alone with 2 children to support, she had no recent work experience, no completed education, and no family nearby to help. Maria had found work as a night cleaner at an office building downtown, a job that paid barely above minimum wage and offered no benefits. She worked from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., then came home to take care of Sofia while Emma was at school. The schedule meant she was getting maybe 4 hours of sleep on a good day, and the stress was taking a visible toll on her health. But it was the only work she could find that allowed her to be home when Sofia needed her most. The family lived in a small apartment in the roughest part of town, The kind of place where the rent was cheap because the building was falling apart and the neighborhood was dangerous after dark. Emma walked 40 minutes each way to attend Lincoln High because it was still within the district boundaries and had better academic programs than the school closer to home. She'd maintained perfect attendance not out of love for learning, though she was bright, but because school was warm, safe, and provided structure in a life that had precious little of any of those things. The hardest part, Emma told Marcus one day as they shared his lunch in the library, isn't even the hunger. It's watching my mom work herself to death and knowing there's nothing I can do to help. She tries so hard to hide how scared she is, but I can see it. Every month when the bills come, every time Sofia needs something for school, every time the car makes a weird noise, you can see her calculating whether we can survive another small disaster. Marcus listened with growing amazement at Emma's maturity and insight. Most 17-year-olds, himself included, lived in a bubble of teenage concerns that rarely extended beyond their immediate social circle and personal desires. But Emma spoke about her family's situation with the wisdom of someone who'd been forced to understand adult realities long before she should have had to. She told him about the careful calculations that governed their daily existence. How they bought dented cans and day-old bread, how they stretched every meal as far as possible, how they'd learned to be grateful for the smallest unexpected windfalls, a neighbor's leftover casserole, a food drive at Sofia's elementary school, the rare weeks when her mother picked up extra hours at work. Emma had become an expert at making something from nothing, at finding free entertainment for Sofia, at mending clothes and shoes and anything else that broke down in their carefully balanced world. Sofia doesn't really understand yet, Emma explained, her voice soft with protective love. She knows we don't have much money, but she's 8. She still believes in magic, still thinks things will get better soon. Mom and I, we try to keep it that way. We want her to have a childhood, you know? We want her to believe in possibilities. Marcus found himself thinking about Emma's family constantly. At his own dinner table, surrounded by easy abundance and casual conversation about weekend plans and minor inconveniences, he would picture Emma's mother working through the night in empty office buildings, cleaning other people's messes for wages that barely covered rent. He would imagine 8-year-old Sofia trying to do homework by the light of whatever lamps still worked in their apartment, while Emma helped with math problems she'd mastered years ago, both of them pretending not to notice their empty stomachs. The contrast between his life and theirs was staggering, and it filled him with a complex mixture of guilt, gratitude, and determination. Guilt that he'd spent 17 years taking his security for granted, while Emma had spent those same years learning to navigate a world of constant uncertainty. Gratitude for parents who loved him enough to pack abundant lunches and worry about his nutrition. And determination to do something meaningful about the gap between his reality and hers. But Marcus was also beginning to understand that Emma and her family's situation wasn't unique. As he started paying attention with new eyes, he began noticing other students who might be struggling in ways he'd never considered. The girl who always wore long sleeves, even in warm weather. The boy who never participated in activities that cost money. The classmates who lived on the other side of town and always seemed tired, possibly because they were working jobs to help support their families. Emma was opening his eyes to a world that existed parallel to his own comfortable reality, a world where teenagers worried about rent money and grocery bills instead of prom themes and college dorm room decorations. It was humbling and educational and heartbreaking all at once. You know, Emma said one day as they finished sharing his lunch, I never expected to have a friend like you. What do you mean? Marcus asked, though he thought he understood. Someone who sees me, she replied simply. Really sees me, not just the quiet girl in the back of the classroom. Someone who cares enough to notice when something's wrong. Someone who knows how to help without making it feel like charity. Her words hit him with unexpected force. In trying to help Emma, Marcus was discovering something about himself he'd never known existed, a capacity for empathy and action that went beyond his comfortable social circle. But more than that, he was discovering that the quiet girl he'd been sharing lunch with was one of the most remarkable people he'd ever met. Emma's strength wasn't the obvious kind displayed on basketball courts or in academic competitions. It was the quiet strength of someone who faced impossible circumstances with grace, who put her family's needs before her own without resentment, who maintained hope and kindness even when life had given her every reason to become bitter and self-focused. She was teaching him what real courage looked like, what genuine character meant, and what it felt like to care about someone else's well-being more than your own comfort. As their daily lunch meetings continued, Marcus found himself falling for Emma in ways he'd never experienced before. This wasn't the casual attraction he'd felt for other girls, based on surface qualities and social compatibility. This was something deeper, built on respect and admiration, and the kind of connection that comes from truly knowing another person's heart. But he also knew that Emma's life was complicated in ways that made traditional teenage romance feel almost trivial. She didn't have the luxury of typical adolescent concerns. Her focus had to remain on survival, on keeping her family together, on navigating each day's challenges without the safety net that most of their classmates took for granted. Still, Marcus couldn't ignore what was growing between them. And he was beginning to suspect that Emma felt it too, in the moments when she let her guard down completely, when she laughed at his stories or shared her dreams for the future with a vulnerability that took his breath away. Whatever was happening between them was real and powerful and unlike anything either of them had experienced before. The question was what to do about it, and whether love could flourish in the harsh soil of economic reality that defined Emma's world. The transformation in Emma over the following weeks was subtle but unmistakable. With regular meals restoring her strength and Marcus's friendship providing emotional support she'd been lacking for years, she began to bloom in ways that reminded Marcus why he'd been drawn to her in the first place. Her quick wit emerged during their lunch conversations, along with a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh until his sides hurt. She was incredibly well-read, having spent countless hours in libraries because they were free, warm, and safe, and her insights about books and life often left him thinking long after their conversations ended. Emma had dreams, too, dreams she'd kept hidden beneath the practical necessity of daily survival. She wanted to study social work in college, to help families like her own navigate the systems that could provide support. She spoke passionately about being a voice for people who felt invisible, about using her own experiences to make a difference in other people's lives. When she talked about her future plans, her whole face lit up with an intensity that made Marcus understand that her current circumstances hadn't killed her ambitions, they'd only made them more focused and meaningful. "I know exactly what it feels like to be invisible," she told him one day, her eyes bright with determination. "To have people look right through you because you don't fit their idea of what matters. I want to spend my life making sure other people never have to feel that way." Marcus found himself falling deeper in love with her every day. It wasn't just her beauty, though he'd begun to notice that too. The way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the graceful way she moved her hands when she talked about something she cared about, the soft curve of her mouth when she was thinking. It was her heart that captivated him, the combination of strength and tenderness that allowed her to face her own struggles with dignity while still caring deeply about other people's pain. Their relationship was developing its own rhythm and traditions. Marcus had started walking Emma to her first class each morning, carrying her books and listening to her thoughts about whatever novel she was reading. They spent every lunch period together, sometimes in the library, sometimes in an empty classroom, always sharing his food and increasingly sharing their thoughts about everything and nothing. After school, Marcus would walk Emma to the bus stop, extending their time together by a few precious minutes before she had to return to her responsibilities at home. Emma began opening up about Sofia, sharing stories that revealed her deep love for her little sister and her fierce protectiveness. Sofia was bright and curious and still believed in fairy tales, despite their circumstances. Emma read to her every night, helped with homework, and created little adventures from whatever free activities they could find. Walks in the park, visits to the library, window shopping at the mall when they needed to get out of their small apartment. "She's going to have opportunities one never had," Emma said with quiet conviction. "She's going to believe she can be anything she wants to be, and I'm going to make sure she has the tools to make it happen." Marcus admired Emma's devotion to her sister, but he also worried about the weight of responsibility she carried. At 17, she was essentially a second parent, helping to raise Sofia while also trying to maintain her own education and emotional well-being. She never complained about this role, but Marcus could see the stress in the careful way she managed her time, always thinking 3 steps ahead about Sofia's needs and her mother's schedule. One afternoon in November, as they sat together in the library sharing his lunch, Emma was quieter than usual. She picked at the sandwich he'd brought, her mind clearly elsewhere. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked gently. Emma hesitated, then sighed. "Sofia's school is having a winter carnival next week. It's this big fundraising event with games and food and prizes. She's been talking about it for weeks, but—" She trailed off, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "But what?" "The tickets are $20 per family, and there are additional costs for food and games. It might as well be $200 for us. I keep trying to figure out how to tell her we can't go without breaking her heart. She's 8, Marcus. She doesn't understand why we can't do things other families do." Marcus felt his chest tighten with a mixture of anger and sadness. Angry that a little girl might miss out on simple childhood joy because of money, sad that Emma had to be the one to disappoint her sister, frustrated by the unfairness of a world where some families struggled to afford $20 school events while others spent that much on coffee without thinking twice. "What if I could help?" he asked carefully. Emma's expression immediately became guarded. "Marcus, no. We've talked about this. I can't take money from you." "Not money," he said quickly. "What if I could figure out another way?" Over the past weeks, Marcus had been thinking a lot about the broader implications of what he'd learned about Emma's family. He'd started researching local resources, learning about food banks and assistance programs and community organizations that helped families in crisis. He'd also been talking to his parents, carefully and without revealing Emma's identity, about poverty in their community and ways their family might be able to help. His parents, Sarah and David Thompson, were good people who'd raised Marcus to be aware of others' needs. They donated to charities, volunteered occasionally, and had always emphasized the importance of helping those less fortunate. But like many middle-class families, their charitable giving was somewhat abstract, writing checks to organizations, donating clothes they no longer needed, participating in holiday food drives. They'd never been confronted with the immediate, personal reality of a family struggling right in their own community. When Marcus started asking questions about local poverty and food insecurity, his parents were initially surprised by his sudden interest in social issues. But as he shared what he'd learned, again, without betraying Emma's privacy, they became increasingly engaged in the conversation. His mother, especially, was moved by stories of families choosing between rent and groceries, of children going hungry while their parents worked multiple jobs. "I had no idea it was so prevalent right here in our own town," Sarah had said during one of their dinner conversations. "I mean, I knew poverty existed, but I guess I thought the programs were adequate, that people could get help if they really needed it." Marcus had learned, through his research and Emma's experiences, that the reality was much more complicated. Many assistance programs had waiting lists or eligibility requirements that excluded working families who earned just slightly too much to qualify but not nearly enough to live comfortably. Others required documentation or transportation that created barriers for families already struggling with basic survival. And many proud families, like Emma's, were reluctant to seek help even when they desperately needed it. The more Marcus understood about the complex web of challenges facing families like Emma's, the more determined he became to find ways to help that honored their dignity while addressing their real needs. The Winter Carnival presented an opportunity to do something concrete and immediate, something that would bring joy to Sofia while also giving Emma a break from the constant worry about disappointing her sister. Marcus spent the weekend developing a plan. He approached Mrs. Rodriguez, Sofia's teacher, whom Emma had mentioned was kind and understanding. Without revealing the family's financial situation, Marcus explained that he wanted to sponsor a family's attendance at the Winter Carnival as part of a community service project. Mrs. Rodriguez was delighted by his initiative and helped him figure out how to cover the admission tickets and provide carnival vouchers in a way that would feel like Sofia had won a school contest rather than received charity. When Marcus presented this solution to Emma, he could see her internal struggle playing out across her face. Her pride warred with her love for Sofia, her independence battled with her exhaustion at carrying so much responsibility alone. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why do you care so much about us?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Marcus realized this was the moment when he needed to be completely honest about his feelings, even though he wasn't sure Emma was ready to hear them. Because I'm falling in love with you, he said simply. Because Sofia's happiness matters to you, which means it matters to me. Because your family is extraordinary, and extraordinary families shouldn't have to choose between rent and a school carnival. Emma's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment Marcus thought he'd said too much, pushed too hard. But then she reached across the table and took his hand, her fingers warm and steady against his. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered. I didn't think I had room in my life for something this beautiful, but somehow you've made space for it. The admission hung between them like a bridge across the gap between their different worlds. Marcus felt his heart racing with the knowledge that Emma returned his feelings, but also with the weight of understanding what those feelings meant in the context of her complicated life. What do we do now? He asked. Emma smiled, the first completely unguarded smile he'd ever seen from her. Now we figure out how to build something real together, even when the world seems designed to keep people like us apart. It was a promise and a challenge all at once, the beginning of a love story that would test everything they thought they knew about themselves and what they were capable of overcoming together. The winter carnival was a magical success. Sofia won 3 stuffed animals at the ring toss, ate cotton candy until her face was sticky with pink sugar, and rode the small Ferris wheel 6 times with a joy so pure it brought tears to Emma's eyes. Marcus had arranged everything perfectly, even showing up at the carnival with his family to make it feel like a natural community gathering rather than an orchestrated charity event. Watching Sofia laugh and play like the carefree 8-year-old she deserved to be, Emma felt something shift inside her chest. For months, maybe years, she'd been carrying the weight of believing that her family's circumstances meant they were somehow less deserving of happiness, less entitled to the simple pleasures other families took for granted. But seeing Sofia's unbridled joy, and knowing it existed because someone else had seen their worth and chosen to act on it, Emma began to understand that accepting help wasn't a sign of failure. It was a recognition of the fundamental interconnectedness that made communities strong. Marcus's parents, Sarah and David, were warm and welcoming without being overwhelming. They treated Emma with genuine interest and respect, asking about her classes and her plans for the future in ways that made her feel seen and valued. When Sofia shyly showed Sarah her ring toss prizes, Sarah's enthusiasm was genuine and infectious, and Emma watched her little sister bask in the attention of another caring adult who saw her potential and celebrated her joy. The evening marked a turning point in Emma and Marcus's relationship. As they walked home together after the carnival, Sofia skipping ahead with her prizes clutched against her chest, Emma felt lighter than she had in years. The constant tension she carried in her shoulders had eased, and for the first time in recent memory, she wasn't calculating the cost of every moment of happiness. "Thank you," she said to Marcus, her voice thick with emotion. "Not just for tonight, but for seeing us. For caring enough to find a way to help that didn't make us feel small." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her fully. In the soft glow of the streetlights, Emma looked radiant, her usual carefully controlled expression replaced by something open and hopeful that took his breath away. "Emma," he said, reaching for her hands, "I need you to understand something. This isn't charity. This isn't me feeling sorry for you. This is me recognizing that you and Sofia and your mom are the strongest, most incredible people I've ever met, and it makes me angry that the world hasn't given you the support you deserve. But more than that, it's me loving you so much that your happiness has become essential to my own." The words hung in the cool night air between them, honest and vulnerable and transformative. Emma felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of relief rather than sadness. For so long, she'd been afraid that letting someone close meant revealing how broken her life was, how many things she couldn't provide or control. But Marcus loved her not despite her struggles, but including them, seeing her strength in the way she handled impossible circumstances rather than judging her for the circumstances themselves. "I love you too," she whispered, and when he kissed her under the streetlight, with Sofia giggling in the background, it felt like the beginning of something that could change everything. But love, as Emma and Marcus were about to learn, was just the first step in a much longer journey. Over the following weeks, as their relationship deepened and became more serious, they had to navigate the complex realities of building a future together when their present circumstances were so different. Marcus had started talking to his parents more openly about Emma's family situation, sharing his concerns and his desire to help in more substantial ways. The Thompsons were moved by their son's compassion and impressed by what they learned about Emma's character and determination. But they also worried about Marcus taking on responsibilities that were beyond his ability to handle as a 17-year-old. "We're proud of you for caring so deeply," David told his son during one of their evening conversations. "And we want to help too. But you need to understand that Emma's family's challenges are complex and long-term. One person, even someone who loves her as much as you do, can't fix everything." Marcus knew his father was right, but he also couldn't accept that caring meant doing nothing. He'd started researching college scholarship programs, looking for opportunities that might help Emma pursue her dream of studying social work. He'd found information about assistance programs that might help her mother access job training or healthcare. He was learning that love sometimes meant becoming an advocate, learning systems and resources and fighting bureaucratic battles that the people you loved were too exhausted to fight alone. Emma, meanwhile, was grappling with her own complex emotions about their relationship. She loved Marcus desperately, but she also worried about the burden her circumstances placed on him and his family. She'd grown up believing that her job was to handle her problems alone, to never ask for help, to never be a burden on anyone else. Learning to accept support, even from someone who offered it freely out of love, required a fundamental shift in how she understood herself and her place in the world. "I don't know how to do this," she confessed to Marcus one afternoon as they sat together in the library. "I don't know how to be in love and also be responsible for my family and also try to build a future. I don't know how to let you help without feeling like I'm taking advantage of your kindness." Marcus looked at her with such tenderness that she felt her heart skip. "We figure it out together," he said simply. "That's what people who love each other do. They figure things out together." The solution, when it came, was both simpler and more complex than either of them had imagined. It started with Marcus's mother Sarah, who had been thinking constantly about Emma's family since meeting them at the winter carnival. Sarah worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and she'd started asking questions about resources for families in crisis. Through her professional network, she learned about a new program designed to help single mothers access education and job training while providing childcare and temporary financial assistance. When Sarah approached Emma's mother Maria about the program, she did so with the same careful respect for dignity that Marcus had learned to use with Emma. She presented it as information she'd come across professionally, something that might be helpful, not as a solution to problems she assumed Maria couldn't handle alone. Maria, who had been working herself to exhaustion for years, was initially resistant to the idea of accepting help. But when she learned that the program would allow her to pursue her GED and potentially train for a career in healthcare while ensuring Sofia had proper childcare and Emma could focus on her studies, she began to see it not as charity but as an investment in her family's future. The application process was complex and required documentation and interviews and waiting periods that felt endless. But Marcus and his family helped navigate the bureaucracy, providing transportation to appointments, helping with paperwork, and offering emotional support during the stressful waiting periods. Emma watched her boyfriend and his family advocate for her family with the same determination they might have shown for their own relatives, and she began to understand what it meant to be part of a community that genuinely cared about each other's success. The acceptance letter came in March, just as Emma and Marcus were starting to plan for their senior year and thinking seriously about college applications. Maria had been accepted into the program and would start classes in the fall, working toward her GED and training as a medical assistant. The program included housing assistance, childcare for Sofia, and a small living stipend that would allow the family to move to a safer neighborhood and stop worrying about basic survival while Maria built new skills. The night they received the news, Emma's family and Marcus's family celebrated together with a dinner at the Thompson house. Emma watched Sofia help Sarah set the table, listened to her mother talk about her plans for the future with more hope in her voice than Emma had heard in years, and felt overwhelmed by gratitude for the way love had transformed all of their lives. "You know what the best part is?" Emma said to Marcus as they stood together on his family's back porch, looking out at the garden his grandmother had planted years before. "What's that?" "Sofia's going to grow up believing that people help each other. She's going to think it's normal for communities to support each other, for people to care about families that aren't their own. She's going to believe that love is something that expands to include whoever needs it." Marcus pulled Emma closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit against his side, how right everything felt when they were together. "And what about you? What are you going to believe?" Emma smiled, thinking about her college applications, about the social work program she'd been accepted to, about the future that had once seemed impossible but now felt not just achievable but inevitable. "I'm going to believe that love really can change everything," she said. "Not just the fairy tale kind of love that solves problems magically, but the real kind that shows up every day and does the work and fights the battles and never gives up on the people who matter." As they stood together in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the evidence of what was possible when people chose to see each other's worth and act on it, Emma and Marcus understood that their love story was really a story about community, about the way caring could spread from one person to another until it transformed entire families and created possibilities that had never existed before. They were 17 years old, and they were planning a future together that would be built on the foundation of everything they'd learned about real love. That it wasn't just about finding someone who made you happy, but about becoming the kind of people who made happiness possible for others. It was about understanding that the most powerful thing two people could do was see each other clearly, support each other completely, and use their combined strength to make the world a little bit better for everyone whose lives they touched. Years later, when Emma and Marcus were married and working together as advocates for families in crisis, when Sofia was in college studying to become a teacher, when Maria had her own medical assistant practice and was helping other single mothers navigate the systems Emma's family had once found so overwhelming, they would look back on that first shared lunch in the high school library as the moment everything changed. Because sometimes love begins with the simple act of seeing someone who has been invisible, of offering what you have to someone who needs it, of recognizing that your abundance and someone else's scarcity are both temporary conditions that can be transformed by the decision to care about each other's well-being. Sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the most ordinary acts of kindness, and sometimes changing one person's life is the first step toward changing everything. Emma had been right about love conquering all, but she'd also learned that conquest wasn't about overpowering obstacles. It was about transforming them into opportunities, about finding ways to build something beautiful and lasting even in the most challenging circumstances. It was about understanding that the strongest foundation for any relationship was the commitment to face whatever came together, with open hearts and stubborn hope and the unshakable belief that everyone deserved to be seen, valued, and supported in becoming their best possible selves. Their love story became the kind that inspired others, not because it was perfect, but because it was real, messy and complicated and sometimes difficult, but always grounded in the fundamental recognition that true love wasn't just about finding happiness, but about creating it for each other and for everyone whose lives they had the power to touch.